So, a question I've gotten a few times on this channel is, Mike, how do you read so many books so fast? Well, that's a multi-layered question, but one reason is there are nights like tonight that I don't sleep very much, and while I wouldn't call myself an insomniac, I try to take advantage of when my brain decides to do this to, you know, get some reading done, and in this case, actually talk about four books that, for different reasons, I felt didn't really need their own video for four different countries, and get this in if a few hours before work, and that's another thing. I work a 9 to 5, but the second element to all this, I would say, is consistency. So even though I do work a 9 to 5, I always pretty much manage to get in my hour and a half to 2 hours of reading average. So I might skip a day or only read a half hour one day, but on the weekend I'll get in a nice three-hour session at some point, whether it's at night or spread out throughout the day. I calculate or estimate that I get in about 2 hours average per day, or maybe a little less. So consistency is really key, especially when you're reading like larger books. And that's the third element, is I always have a large book going in the background that I'm reading slowly and taking my time with. That it took me and my wife and I a year to get through Don Quixote. Took me 1 to 2 months to get through Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain and Ovid's Metamorphoses. Just those are the first that come to mind. There are others. But right now I have I the Supreme, Yo el Supremo by Augusto Roa Bastos going for Paraguay, an amazing book. I'm reading it in Spanish and I'm not too far in, and I've been working on it a week, so I expect it's going to take another few weeks to finish this, but that's going on in the background for this whole time, and when I have a big book going like that, I try to get at least a half hour to an hour of reading that book per day, and then devote maybe another hour to reading a shorter book like this Blinding Absence of Light, which shouldn't take me more than a few days to get through, but is also really incredible. So that's the final thing I'll say, is that not every book needs to be read slowly over the long term, right? So by those four things, take advantage of when you can't sleep, read a big book over the long term while reading shorter books, in between, balance it out, and be consistent. That's pretty much it. So, answering a frequently asked question, and now I'm going to talk about these four books, and two of them are very short, and I read in pretty much 1 or 2 hours each. These other two that are a bit longer, I can't really say I finished, and I'll also talk about why, but let me just go one by one. So, the Conscript for Eritrea, this is kind of, if you're really into, understanding the origin of African literature, and especially African literature that's translated from native languages, this is probably a must-have book for you. Now, to call it a novella even is a stretch. About half of this is introductory notes, and then about 50 pages is actually the story in somewhat, not too small text, right? So it's almost a long, short story. And it doesn't really have, in my mind, the rereadability that your typical novella has. So it's, I don't really put it in a class of books that I would call my favorites or great literature or anything, but to give you an idea of what it's about, it is historically interesting. Eritrea, if you don't know, is the coastal country that is next to Ethiopia, and the two used to be kind of part of the same country or empire. I don't know what you really would call it, but the Italians kind of took over Eritrea and colonized it, and that was their bastion to invade the interior of Ethiopia, and which they never did fully consolidate and colonize. But Eritrea, we have here a young man from Eritrea who basically enlists in the Italian army to go and fight Arab enemies of the Italians in Libya. So you have a person kind of taking up the patriotic military spirit of the Italians, even though he's from Eritrea, and going to fight in a foreign land that the Italians are trying to colonize. Yeah, the colonized helping the colonizer, fighting in the army of the colonizer. And this is all willing, or, well, apparently. The young man willingly goes off to the army, and it all happens very fast. You know, the journeys by boat, the battles in the desert against the Arabs in Libya. The whole book just kind of flies by in an instant. It's almost like a fleeting memory, just a fleeting document that makes me want to know more. The book did make me want more, and I felt like this is almost a case where, as much as I enjoy density in literature, this was almost too dense, and I feel like it would have actually benefited by being about twice as long, because it really is not very long. And just having more fleshed out details. But this, by the way, was written in 1927 and published in the 1950s. So it is, you know, quite a, I guess you could say, an African classic, or East African, if we want to be a bit more zoned in. So I don't know, I found it interesting, but there's not, you know, how much can I say about a book that's like practically a long short story? Not very much, without just giving a blow-by-blow summary, which sometimes I do for like the books I really love and have a lot to talk about, but this just wasn't one that I felt was really, you know, it wouldn't be at the top of my list, I suppose, to recommend to people of books that I've read from the region. So, if you do really like literature from the region, that is one that I feel like you should know, or at least be aware of, right? If you want to focus on that region. Going to West Africa, we have Why Goats Smell Bad and Other Stories from Benin. These are like folk tales. I only read a select few from this one. There are one which was a sort of a Cinderella story, but with an orphan boy who, his stepmother treats him very badly, and he's rescued by kind of a spirit. Then there's another really interesting one that I read later on, of like this rainbow serpent that captures a princess, and the elders of the tribe they can't come up with a solution of how to rescue this princess, and so the story literally just ends like, will you be able to save her? And whoever had this book before me made some notes in it, and actually wrote that they used this with their students as like a choose your own adventure story. So I thought that was kind of cool. I will definitely be going back to this one. It's just not a book that I feel like anytime soon I want to read cover to cover. And I think that might be the case with, you know, quite a few of these sort of folktale type books, but I'm still going to feature them on the channel, maybe in this type of way, like in concordance with other books, because, you know, again, not every video is going to need a 10, 15, 20 minute discussion, and these are folk tales, and it's a very niche thing. All these books I feel that I'm talking about today, these four, are kind of niche, that you really want to have to know something about the country, or be interested in the case of the Conscript, like the historical context, or in this case, you probably would have to be really interested in sort of West African folk tales, and that would kind of have to be your particular favorite type of thing to read. But it is, I will say, it's separated into 4 sections, much like the one that the collection of folktales I read for Polynesia. And the 4 sections are orphans, twins, and other children, cautionary tales and spirit stories, porkoi tales and animal wisdom, and trickster tales, Yogbo the Glutton. Again, I feel like there is really interesting stuff in here, but sometimes if you read a book of folk tales like from cover to cover, you get a lot of repetition. And so it's almost better to use them as sort of I'll read one here and there, you know? So this will definitely stick on my shelf. There's interesting stuff in here, and I'm happy to have it, honestly. So despite the kind of silly title, the stories are more interesting than the silly title would have you believe. So that brings us to the one for Nepal that I had chosen. Arresting God in Kathmandu, Samrat, Upadhyay. I don't know how I pronounce that, but so this is one that I probably should have caught when I was filtering out books that I found to be kind of repetitive modern literature a few videos ago. And again, it's nothing against the author. I think it's as I know one commenter pointed out, and I agree with, it kind of just reflects publishers' choices in the last 25 years or so. This was published in 2001. So yeah, that turn of the millennium is, I think, really where this really started in full force, where publishers are kind of finding literature to translate from around, or fiction to translate from different countries around the world, publishing them into English and being like, this is the first book published in or translated into English from this language or from this country, which I guess is fine. So regardless, I guess in also kind of starting to read it, just kind of the first few pages gave me an idea that this wasn't going to be a book that I was excited to read or was going to enjoy, and I just decided to move on, I guess. Yeah. None of the reviews I looked at really seemed to rave about the book either, so I did want to mention that. Maybe there's something better for Nepal. If you have something classic or an older text or something really interesting to recommend for Nepal, please do. I'm interested, at least for the future. Away Away by Jana Beňova. That's not an N-ye. Beňova. So there's comparisons to Clarice Lispector on the cover here. I believe this was published in 2014. Well, it's definitely post-2010. It's got some interesting bits of writing. It's very short, again, very thin. Didn't take much more than an hour or two to read this. And the way it's written, too, is kind of in sort of short, I don't know if you can see that, sort of short vignettes. You can see kind of how the page is laid out. And I actually kind of like that style. And I think it was more effective for me reading it as almost a book of poetry or prose vignettes, not trying to figure out what was the coherent structure of the story. Although there does seem to be a story going on, I never really quite figured out what it was or cared. I just kind of enjoyed certain vignettes, and when I got to the end of the book, it's the kind of book where it's like, I probably need to read this again to figure out what's going on, but I didn't really like it that much. And this is for Slovakia, by the way. Yeah, Jana Beňova, Away for Slovakia. So, I don't know, I just kind of read it and was like, it was fine. There was some good stuff in it, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it or put it in my top books. And I don't really have too much else to say about it. So that's kind of why I decided, to do all 4 of these books together, just because I didn't have a whole lot to say about any of them for various reasons. Definitely didn't need their own videos, and yeah, that's 4 more countries that I can color off on the map. But that's not to say, again, I'm not lumping these together just to race through this. I'm trying to kind of filter out right now a lot of the stuff that I'm not that interested in reading and put it together, or that, yeah, again, doesn't need its own video to talk about. And I want the end of this project to just be like gold, right? I want to be ending this project in the last 11 months of my 1001 nights of reading the world, to be just really great books, and like, you know, I the Supreme for Paraguay, and this Blinding Absence of Light for Morocco. These two books are outstanding, and I want just stuff like this to be what I'm going out of this project on. So that's kind of why we're in this, I guess you could say, rough patch, and there's still probably going to be maybe 1 or 2 videos like this again, where I group multiple books together. But I'm gonna try to do this with the objective being not to be repetitive and boring and such. So anyway, hope you enjoyed this early morning video, and I guess I'll enjoy my coffee and get ready for work, and we'll see you back next time very soon with this Blinding of Absence of Light by Tahar Ben Jaloun for Morocco. Really looking forward to discussing this one. Take care.